Okay, so you know how much we love digging into the mechanics of storytelling, right? And you guys, our amazing listeners, send in some really cool excerpts about how successful screenplays are actually structured. That's what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, it's a chance to get under the hood and see the blueprint for how these stories are put together and what makes them so captivating. I think the cool thing is that understanding these building blocks, it doesn't just make you appreciate movies more, it helps you appreciate any kind of story, whether it's a book or a podcast, whatever.
I totally agree. I mean, think about it. A great movie, it's not just a bunch of random cool scenes thrown together. It's structured, almost like an argument in a way. Everything has a purpose. It's building towards something. And our source actually points to this thing called theme stated as a starting point.
Right. And it's interesting because this theme-stated idea, it's subtle. Like
Yeah.
within the first 5 minutes of a well-written screenplay, you often get the core theme of the whole movie introduced, but not in a big, obvious way.
It's not like a character turns to the camera and says, this is a movie about the dangers of greed. It's much more subtle than that, right?
Exactly. It's usually just a quick remark, a question maybe, from a character, often not even the main character.
Our source has these great examples. They're like these little seeds that get planted early on. Things like, be careful what you wish for, or pride goeth before a fall. You know those classic sayings.
Right. Or family is more important than money. Just these little things that might seem insignificant at first.
And then there's that great example from Blank Check. Do you remember that one?
Hmm.
He who has the gold makes the rules.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
And that statement, as simple as it sounds, it basically becomes the foundation for the whole movie. The story then explores that idea from all these different angles. Like, is that really true in this world? What happens when someone tries to break that rule?
And I think what's so clever about introducing it subtly and early like that, it lets the theme kind of seep into your mind without you even realizing it. It becomes
Yeah.
part of the fabric of the story.
So it's almost like the screenwriter is presenting their thesis statement, right? They're hinting at what they want to explore. And the cool thing is, the source says this isn't just for those really serious dramas. Even comedies, action flicks, sci-fi, whatever, they all need to be about something. And that something should ideally be hinted at in those first few pages, by page 5 even.
Yeah, I totally agree. Having that underlying theme gives the story depth.
So we've got the theme planted. What's next? How does the screenwriter build from there?
Well, then we move into the setup, which usually covers the first 10 to 12 pages of the script. This part is all about hooking the reader, the viewer, really grabbing their attention.
So this is where we meet the main characters, right? Like, our source says by page 10, we should have a pretty good sense of who the main players are in that A story, that main plot line.
Right. But it's more than just introductions. The setup, it also establishes those little quirks, those behaviors that reveal personality. It shows us why the hero in particular needs to change. What are their flaws? What's holding them back? What's missing in their life?
Which brings us to this fascinating idea of the 6 things that need fixing.
Oh, yeah. I love this part.
Okay. So the source acknowledges that the number 6 is kind of arbitrary, but the point is there are these key things, these elements that are missing or messed up in the hero's life, and those things need to be addressed throughout the story.
And what's cool is that those 6 things that need fixing, they often become running gags or callbacks.
Right. They're not just random flaws. They're woven into the story. They come back in interesting ways, and when they get resolved, it's like this satisfying payoff for the audience.
The big example really illustrates this. The initial thing he wants is just to be tall enough for the ride.
Right. And of course, he wants to get the girl, have his own space, typical kid stuff. But the film really explores those desires in this deeper way.
It's about the consequences of those desires, what happens when you get what you want, but maybe weren't ready for it.
Okay, so if we zoom out a bit, our source says this setup, this whole first act, it's basically the movie's thesis. It's showing us the world as it is before everything changes. There's often this sense of normalcy or maybe even a false sense of security. But underneath it all, there's this tension. It feels like something's got to give.
Right. It's that calm before the storm.
And then, boom, something happens that throws everything off balance. What's the term for that again?
That's the catalyst. And the source typically places this around page 12. It's the event that disrupts the hero's world and kicks the story into gear.
It's like that first domino falling, right?
Yeah.
And it has to be something significant. It can't just be like, oh, they spilled their coffee. It needs to be a real game changer. The source gives some great examples, like the unexpected package in Romancing the Stone.
Oh, yeah.
Or the phone call in Rain Man that brings the news about the father's death. Or Elle Woods getting dumped in Legally Blonde.
Right. It's that moment that forces them to reevaluate everything.
And there are so many other examples. Getting fired out of the blue, a betrayal, a life-changing diagnosis, that kind of thing. Whatever it is, it has to shatter the hero's world and force them to react.
It's the point of no return.
And what's interesting is these catalysts often seem like bad news at first. It's a loss, a setback. But ultimately, it sets the hero on a path to something better, something they wouldn't have found otherwise.
I think it's like that saying, sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself. It's through those challenges that we grow the most.
Yeah, I get that. And our source is very specific about the timing of this catalyst, around page 12. They say if it happens too late, the audience starts to get restless. Like, okay, when's the story actually going to start?
Exactly. You need to hook them early.
All right, so the hero's world has been turned upside down. What happens next?
Well, then, we enter the debate section, which usually plays out between pages 12 and 25. This is where the hero is wrestling with the call to action. It's their last chance to say, wait a minute, do I really want to do this?
It's that inner turmoil, the should I go, dare I go kind of thing. They're weighing the risks, the consequences of saying yes or saying no.
Our source uses that example from their Golden Fleece movie idea. That kid who gets kicked out of military school and his parents have moved away, he has to decide, do I go find them or do I just stay put?
And even in a lighter movie like Legally Blonde, Elle's debate is about whether she can actually get into Harvard Law. It's a real question. It's not a guarantee.
Exactly. So the debate isn't just the hero stalling for time. It's about raising the stakes, making the decision meaningful.
So by the end of this debate section, there needs to be a clear question that the hero is trying to answer, right? A conflict that they're going to tackle in the next act.
Right. It sets up the central challenge.
Okay, so the hero has wrestled with their doubts. They've weighed the options. What happens next?
That brings us to the break into two, which typically happens around page 25. This is the turning point where the hero commits to the journey, leaving their old world behind and entering a new one.
Our source is very specific about this page number, page 25. They say it's crucial for the pacing of the story.
And they also emphasize that the hero has to make a conscious choice to enter this new world. They can't be tricked or forced into it. It has to be their decision.
Like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, the deaths of his aunt and uncle is what pushes him. But he chooses to go with Obi-Wan.
Exactly. It's about agency. The hero takes control of their destiny.
Okay, so they've crossed the threshold. Now what?
Well, around page 30, we usually get the introduction of the B story.
Which is often, but not always, the love story.
Right. And it's not just about romance. The B story, it usually carries the theme of the movie as well.
It kind of echoes what's happening in the main plot.
Yeah. And it also acts as this kind of booster rocket, as our source puts it. It helps smooth the transition into Act 2, which can be a pretty big shift.
Legally Blonde is a great example of this. Elle's relationship with the manicurist, it gives her this emotional support system. She has someone to confide in, someone who believes in her.
And the B-story characters, they're often new to the story. We haven't met them in Act 1. And they can be like these mirror images of the characters from the hero's old world.
Like, the manicurist is kind of this down-to-earth version of Elle's sorority sisters.
Exactly. She represents a different set of values.
So the B story does a lot of heavy lifting. It provides the romance, it reinforces the theme, and it gives the audience a little break from the main plot.
And then, after all that setup, we finally get to the good stuff.
The fun and games section.
Exactly. This is usually from page 30 to 55. And our source calls this the promise of the premise. This is where the movie really delivers on what it promised the audience.
This is like the trailer moments, right? The big action sequences, the hilarious scenes, whatever the movie is known for.
Yeah. It's about having fun. It's not so much about plot at this point. It's about showcasing the core idea of the movie. And the source says this is where you often find those big set pieces, those memorable scenes.
They tell this hilarious story about the world's slowest car chase and stop, or My Mom Will Shoot.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And apparently that scene, as ridiculous as it sounds, was what convinced the studio to buy the script.
So it's about delivering on the promise of the movie, whether that's action, comedy, whatever.
And our source makes the point that this fun and games idea, it applies to all genres. So like in Die Hard, it's Bruce Willis outsmarting the terrorists. In Phone Booth, it's Colin Farrell trapped in that phone booth, the tension of that situation.
Right. It's about showing us what the movie's all about.
And it's often a bit lighter in tone than what comes later, like Jim Carrey acting like God in Bruce Almighty, or Tobey Maguire testing out his powers in Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's that sense of discovery, that initial excitement.
And the source says buddy movies often have the most conflict between the partners in this section. Like they're still figuring each other out.
It's all part of the fun.
Okay, so we've had our fun, but then things start to get serious.
Right, because then we hit the midpoint, which is usually right around page 55. And this is a big turning point. It's like the halfway mark of the movie, and it often involves a major shift in the story.
It's either an up, where the hero seems to have achieved something, or a down, where everything seems to be falling apart.
But the key is, it's a false victory or a false defeat. Things aren't what they seem.
Our source tells this great story about listening to movies on audio cassette while driving back and forth between Santa Barbara and LA. And he realized that the midpoint always happened right when he was passing this specific landmark.
That's amazing.
And he uses "What's up, Doc?" as an example. There's the scene where the hotel room catches fire, and that's the midpoint. It's a huge turning point. Everything changes after that.
And I think that midpoint reversal, it's so effective because it keeps the audience guessing. It keeps them engaged.
It's like just when you think you know where the story's going, it throws you a curveball.
And it also raises the stakes. It shows that the hero's journey is far from over.
And our source says the midpoint is directly connected to another key beat, the all is lost moment. They're like mirror images of each other.
Right. What seems like a victory at the midpoint might actually lead to defeat later on, and vice versa.
Okay, so we've passed the midpoint, the stakes are higher. What happens next?
Well, then we enter the bad guys close-in section, which is typically between pages 55 and 75. And the source admits that this is often the toughest part of the screenplay to write.
Because even if the antagonists seem to have been defeated at the midpoint, they come back stronger than ever. They're not giving up.
And it's not just external pressure. Internal conflict can also start to emerge. The hero's team might start to fall apart. Doubts and jealousy creep in.
Like in Mean Girls, when the plastics start to turn on each other after they've achieved a certain level of popularity.
Exactly. The hero is facing challenges from all sides. They're starting to feel isolated.
It's like the walls are closing in, and then boom, everything falls apart.
That's the all is lost moment, which usually hits around page 75. And it's the opposite of the midpoint. It's a moment of false defeat.
So it looks like the hero has lost everything, but there's still hope, right?
Right. It's the darkest hour before the dawn.
And our source introduces this really interesting concept here called the whiff of death.
Oh, yeah, that's a powerful one.
So they say that at this point in the story, there's often a death, either literal or symbolic, and it's meant to really drive home the gravity of the situation.
Like in Star Wars when Obi-Wan Kenobi dies.
Right. The mentor often dies at this point. But the whiff of death can be more subtle, too. It could be the death of a pet, the loss of a precious object, or even just the symbolic death of an old way of thinking.
Like in Elf, when Will Ferrell is sitting on that bridge contemplating suicide. It's that symbolic death of his old self.
Right. It's like something has to die to make way for something new.
Exactly. It's about clearing the path for transformation.
Okay, so the hero is at rock bottom. What happens next?
Well, then they enter what the source calls the dark night of the soul. This is that period of despair and hopelessness that follows the all is lost moment. It usually happens between pages 75 and 85.
It's that moment of, what's the point? It's all over.
But it's also the moment right before the breakthrough.
Because the hero has hit rock bottom, so they're open to new ideas, new ways of thinking.
Exactly. It's the necessary descent before the ascent.
And that brings us to the break into 3 on page 85. This is where the hero finally figures it out. They have that aha moment. They know what they need to do.
And this breakthrough often comes from combining what they've learned from the A story and the B story.
Like the insights from the love story, the thematic discussions, they all come together to provide the answer.
It's the synthesis of their internal and external journeys.
And then we're off to the races.
That's right. We enter the finale, Act 3, which usually runs from page 85 to 110.
This is where everything comes together. The hero puts their plan into action, the conflicts are resolved, the bad guys get what's coming to them.
And the hero, they've changed. They've grown. They're not the same person they were at the beginning of the story.
Our source says the final battle often involves defeating the antagonists in ascending order. Like you take out the smaller obstacles first, and then you face the big bad boss at the end.
And it's not just about winning. It's about the hero using what they've learned to make a positive impact on the world.
Right. They've changed, and they've changed the world around them.
And then finally, we get the final image on page 110. This is the last shot of the movie.
And our source says this image should be the opposite of the opening image. It's like visual proof that the hero has transformed.
It's the perfect ending note.
And, our source acknowledges that some people might think these rules are too rigid, too formulaic, but they use miscongeniality as a perfect example of how these 15 beats can be used to create a really successful and entertaining movie.
Right. Miscongeniality is a great example because it's a comedy. It's not a serious drama, but it still follows these beats.
You can see it all there. The opening image of Sandra as a tomboy, the themes stated about not needing to be feminine, the setup of her FBI life, the catalyst of the pageant threat.
And then the break into two, with the makeover, the fun and games of the pageant training, the B story with her friendships with the other contestants.
The midpoint where the stakes are raised, the bad guys close in as she faces professional and personal challenges.
The all is lost moment where she risks everything.
The dark night of the soul where she doubts herself.
The break into three where she finds her strength.
The finale where she uses her skills to save the day.
And that final image of her accepting the Miscongeniality Award, surrounded by all the women she's befriended. It's a classic example of how these principles can work in any genre.
So the point is, these aren't just rules for the sake of rules. They're tools that can help you tell a more engaging and satisfying story.
Exactly. Whether you're a screenwriter or just someone who loves stories, understanding these principles can deepen your appreciation for how stories are crafted.
So we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the structure of successful screenplays. And maybe now, when you watch a movie, you'll start to notice these beats at play. You'll see the structure underneath the story.
And here's a thought for you to chew on. Do you see these same structural elements in other types of stories? Like in novels, in podcasts, even in your own life? How do these principles apply? And what happens when someone breaks the rules?
That's a great question to think about, and we'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.